Okay, so today we're going to bleed the brakes on the 68 Camaro. So what happened is I had to jam the brakes really hard, really fast recently, and there used to be a sensor, a brake fluid sensor here, and I blew it, and there was a leak, brake fluid everywhere, and unfortunately got over the chassis, and brake fluid messes up paint, so you really have to clean that up really quick. So plug that leak up, but because of that leak, I have air in my brake lines. So that's what we're going to do today is bleed the brake lines, take the air out, and I'm going to show you a really quick way how you can do it yourself. You could have someone in the car put the brakes on as you take the air out of the brake lines, but I'm going to show you how you can do this on your own. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the cover off of the brake fluid reservoir here and make sure that we always have brake fluid in here. You don't want to let this get bone dry because that'll just introduce more air into your brake lines. So okay, take that cover out. Okay. So want to make sure there's fluid in there, which there is. And by the way, some people ask, hey, is it normal for this to tilt up, instead of being straight level? This factory came with this tilted up. So that is normal. So don't fret that, don't freak out if your master cylinder is tilted up at an angle. All right. So normally to get to the calipers where the brake lines are, you would take off your wheel and get to the caliper that way. You would jack the car up, take off your wheel and get to the caliper that way. But we have a lift here. So we're going to lift the car up and get under the car so I don't have to go through the trouble of taking all the wheels off. And that's how we'll bleed the brakes. But bleeding the brakes is the same thing. Whether your wheel is off, you're doing it on a lift, you're accessing the same caliper, the same place. So let's go ahead and do that next. We'll lift the car up and let's go on to the next step. Okay, so we're under the car now. So normally you would take the wheel off to get access to the calipers. So you're going to see the brake calipers. These are Willwood calipers. There's a bleeder on the top. There's a bleeder on the bottom. You always want to use the top one, not the bottom one. That's one. The second is you always want to start with the caliper that's furthest away from the master cylinder. In this case, it's the passenger rear. After the passenger rear, then we'll do the driver rear. After the driver rear, we'll do the passenger front and then the driver front. So you want to keep it in that order. What we're going to be using is a tool from Harbor Freight. It's about 25 bucks. It's called the brake bleeder vacuum pump. And then we're going to release a little bit of the bleeder valve, just a tiny bit, to let air start dribbling out until we get to the oil. And you're going to see, you always want a constant, you don't want this to be to fill this up and then watch it, drain air, because otherwise you'll start getting air into the system. Okay, so the brake bleeder comes with these things, and normally you attach the hose to one end and then this side goes onto the bleeder. But for me, these things never stick onto the bleeder valve. They always slide off. Even if I put grease on it to cover the gaps so I don't get air in it, it still just pops right off. So what I do is I put the hose on here, but on this side that I attach to the bleeder, as you can see, what I've done here is I zip tie to hold it tight onto the bleeder. I zip tie it and I put it all the way beyond the 1/4 inch hex on the bleeder. I go all the way down to, I think, what is it, the 11/32 bolt that goes onto the caliper. But I already loosened the bleeder and then just hand tightened it. So I'm going to basically use the leverage of that zip tie to just hand loosen the bleeder to let the air out. So I don't need a wrench or anything like that. It's tight, it's loose enough, but yet tight enough where I can just turn it by hand. So that's how I do it, because you don't want the pressure on this to go down before you start bleeding it, because all that does is just introduce air into the system. That's what you're trying to eliminate. So This is the bleeder, the brake bleeder. It's $25 at Harbor Freight, really inexpensive. You don't want to tip this upside down. You don't want any of the brake fluid to come into the vacuum pump side. That will kind of ruin your vacuum pump. So you always want to make sure that this is very well upright, or at least at an angle where any fluid isn't going to get into the vacuum line on the other side. All right, so you're going to see, I'm going to pump this to like around 15. Okay, and you can see it's not going down, so that seal with that zip tie is tight. There's no air. You can always use some grease to cover up any little tiny air gaps that it might have. There we go. It's about 15. It's tight. It's not losing any of the pressure or the vacuum. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to loosen this a little tiny bit, just a tiny bit. You can see the air starting to flow through, and you can see oil coming down, and I don't have much air in here. There we go. You can see at the top the bubbles. And oil's coming down, so I can close this. Pretty much got all the air out of it. That's tight. You can see we had minimal air bubbles. We got rid of the air bubbles, actually. I don't know if the camera picked it all up. We got some fluid in here. So now we got, before we get to the next wheel, to the next caliper, I want to make sure that I'm tightening this up a little bit. You don't have to super tighten. Okay, so that's tight. And I'm going to go now over to the driver's rear and do the same thing there. Okay. So before I do anything on the driver's rear, I'm going to put a ladder next to the car so I don't have to drop it, but I want to make sure that there is fluid in the reservoir, since I suck some fluid in here. You don't want the reservoir to come down to zero fluid and get air in the lines. That's worse, because that's actually pretty much, I'm going to have to start completely over. So let's do that, and I'm going to empty this. Go. Okay, so I brought the car down because I did want to show what happens. So that little bit of fluid that was in that cup came from this reservoir. So you see the fluid here isn't up to the top anymore. So what we're going to do before we do the next rear is we're going to fill this up a little bit more. Like I said, we don't want to risk depleting the fluid and getting air in the line. Notice the front one didn't come down because that is for the front brakes. So we're doing the rear, so that's where this comes in. All right, so let me add some .3 brake fluid to this, and then we'll get to the driver's rear and we'll bleed that. Okay, so we're under the driver's rear. We're going to pump this up to 15. Okay, again, and once it gets to 15, you shouldn't see it go down. You should have a nice seal. If not, like I said, put grease around it if you need to. So you can see we're almost at 15 there. All right. So now that we're at 15 there, I'm going to loosen this a little bit with my hand because I already loosened it enough. And just a little at a time, and you can see the air starting to come out. And then when it reaches 0 on the pump, tighten it back up, bring it back up to 15 again, and do the same thing, loosen it. There's the air, and there, oil is starting to flow through. You don't want to loosen it too much, just a little bit to get the little tiny bubbles out, otherwise you're going to drain your cylinder of oil very quickly. And we'll do just a little bit more. I'm starting to see pure oil coming in here. Pumping up to 15 again. And there we go. And those air bubbles are starting to disappear. Okay, you can see the reservoir here is starting to fill a little with the air bubbles disappearing. You're going to get more oil in here. So I think we're good at this point. We started getting a lot of oil coming through without bubbles. So I'm pulling this out. That's what she said. And I'm taking a 1/4 inch. This is 1/4 inch, okay? And tightening that up just a little bit, not too much. And there you go. So now we've bled the rears. And we're going to do the exact same thing for the front, starting with the passenger side caliper and then the driver side. The thing to remember here is make sure when you're loosening that 1/4 inch bleeder, that you're not loosening that, I think it's 11/32 that's below it, I'm not sure. But you're not loosening the nut below it that's going right straight to the caliper. So if you need to put a wrench on that bottom nut and then loosen the 1/4 inch bleeder. So you don't want to loosen both of those at the same time. So I think that's it. That is really it for bleeding the brakes. I mean, it's really that simple. The main thing, the main point is when you're putting this hose onto the bleeder and you're going all the way back, one, don't let oil get into the other side. You don't want it to get into the vacuum pump. The other is you want a tight seal. So if you have little tiny air, if this doesn't stay at 15, so you can see if I put my thumb over this and I pump it up, okay? If it does, it should stay at 15. If not, you might want to put some grease around to cover up the little tiny air bubble gap or the air gaps you might have in it. But you can see if I let my thumb out even just a little and introduce a little bit of air, you can see this is going to start going down, and that's not what you want. That's just showing you before you even loosen that bleeder valve is that you have air already in the vacuum line, and you don't want that. Okay. A decent kit. It's $25 at Harbor Freight. If you get everything hooked up and you want to release the air out of the vacuum, you just hit this little button here, and it'll also release the air out of the vacuum as well. Just push it in with your thumb, and make sure. I've seen videos of this already. This comes with a little black plastic thing that's right here. It's for shipping. If you leave that black plastic thing in there, you're not going to be able to pump this all the way to 15. So make sure that you remove that little black plastic shipping piece that's here on this. They don't tell you, I don't know if they tell you to do that in the instructions or not, but remember to do that. That's really important if you want to get any kind of vacuum. All right. So that's it. What we'll do to finish this off is we'll just make sure that there's brake fluid topped off on the master cylinder there on the reservoir. Put the cover back on, and we're all set. I don't think I need to bore you with all that detail. But that's all there is to it. It's really that simple. So like I always say, you only live once. Life is short. Enjoy life like it's your last day. Peace out.